I want to begin this talk by acknowledging that all of the men's work that I've done in my life is coming together and culminating here in this talk. I first started participating in a men's group over 11 years ago, and I'm still sitting in that same men's group today. I started teaching about sacred sexuality to men in 2014, and I started leading men's retreats in 2019. Throughout the thousands of men's circles that I've participated in, I have very slowly been learning the essential value of gathering together with men. So our topic today is men's work. And I want to say thank you to the folks who are here listening on Zoom, and welcome to the folks who are joining over Facebook. So it's my belief that today is the most exciting time in the last 10,000 years to be a man. With the beginning of agriculture, the farming villages that would become Western civilization developed a mythology for what it means to be a man. It's a man's job to fight, to rule, and to provide. This mythology has been with us in various forms throughout all of Western history. However, in the course of the last decade, our culture has largely deconstructed this myth and continues to do so. Today, what I will argue is that it's no longer true that it's a man's job in our civilization to fight, to rule, and to provide. In our globalized culture, who is there left in our globalized village? Who is there left to fight? The wars that the West has waged over the last 50 years have neither been noble nor just. And we as men have not been summoned to the battlefields to band together with our brothers and fight to the death to protect what we hold as most precious in life. This is not the world that we live in. We have no evidence that our society is best served by political and economic power being held primarily by men. In fact, we have compelling data to suggest that societies that share power and authority equally between genders are more resilient, are more cooperative, and invest more in future generations. In this regard, the men who are ruling our world today are failing all of us. It's no longer true that we need men to provide for their wives because women are not strong enough or smart enough to take care of themselves. This argument was tenuous at best, if it was ever true, but certainly today. There can be no doubt that it's not men's role in society to provide for women. We still need men and women together to provide for their children, to provide for the elderly, and to provide for our communities and our ecosystems and planet. However, the ways that we have been providing are fundamentally broken. Our economic system is chopping, mining, and polluting ecosystems, and we call this value creation. Over the last century, we have entered one of the biggest extinction events in the history of this planet. It is the Great Anthropocene extinction. We, human civilization, is threatening to annihilate not only our own civilization, but most of the complex life on this planet along with us. So consider this. If you are investing your savings and retirement in the stock market, you are voting with your dollars to maximize profit at the expense of the earth. The result is that we are handing the next generation a dying planet. So if it's no longer true that our role as men is to fight, to rule, and provide in the ways that it has been true over the last 10,000 years, where then does that leave us? Masculinity is having an identity crisis. The old structures are burning away, and like a forest fire, the seeds of a new masculinity are being germinated here today. This is why I say it's the most exciting time in the last 10,000 years to be a man talking about masculinity. What we envision, and more importantly, what we embody in the coming decades is going to set a new imprint, perhaps, if we're lucky, for the next 10,000 years to come. In the very, very grand scheme of things, this is why men's work matters. It is one place where we, as men, can strip away the social conditioning, the privilege, the entitlement, and the complacency of hegemonic masculinity. We can become purified by the fires, and we can learn how to become life-affirming men. I want to share more about this term, hegemonic masculinity, and in particular, why I think we should be using it over other terms like patriarchy or toxic masculinity. Hegemony is a word that means dominant power. So hegemonic masculinity describes a social system where a small number of men wield power and authority over other groups of humans. This dominating force is exploiting and oppressive, and it acts towards women, other genders, minority races and classes, other sexual preferences, other religions, and other men. I use this term because it's precise. So when we hear toxic masculinity, it can mean almost anything today. But this term illuminates the core distortion, which is domination and the wielding of power over others. So probably none of the men who are going to listen to this speech are going to be in the ruling elite of our society. So be it. Most men will be in the position of having experienced the violence and exploitation of other men throughout their lives. At the same time, most men will be benefiting from this power structure in subtle and sometimes invisible ways. At least my privilege was invisible to me before I started studying it. So when I was growing up, I saw the cruelty and the greed of men in power, and I said to myself, I will never be like those men. I made a judgment, and then I made a promise to myself. Where I went instead was into what I will call disaffected masculinity. I labeled men as the problem, and then I disowned my own masculinity. My working hypothesis was that I could deconstruct and transcend the masculine gender altogether. Fast forward a few decades, and I now understand that disaffected masculinity enables and empowers hegemonic masculinity. By refusing to stand up and advocate for what is true, I am allowing those who are abusing power to go right ahead and continue to do so. In addition, by disowning my own masculinity, I was disconnected from my potency, from my fertility, my presence, and in general, all of the incredibly creative gifts that masculinity has to bestow. Another example of what I see. I know men who have been violent and abusive. They have caused serious harm with their unchecked aggression. And I have seen them internalize this judgment as men are the problem. So on my path, I pointed the finger outside and I said, you are the problem. For these men, the finger points back inside and the judgment is, I am the problem. And this brings a crippling amount of shame along with it. Whether you're pointing outside or inside, the issue is that we are lacking today a vision of masculinity that we can uphold as honorable and true. And this is the first gift of men's work. It provides a forum for men who are ready to do their work, to see other men embodying healthy versions of masculinity. Healthy masculinity is learned by imprinting it from other men. When men's groups are held well, and it's not the case that all of them are, but when they are working properly, they offer a broader understanding of masculinity. So hegemonic and disaffected masculinities are both fundamentally immature. These are expressions of gender which are wounding and wounded. Mature, healthy masculinity looks like something different entirely. Each man must first see this possibility and then begin to experience what this is for himself. Men's work is the container for taking initiation into mature forms of masculinity. And indeed, when we look at tribal and indigenous cultures where the full archetypal life cycle is in place, men come together and initiate with other men. This is how humans have done it for untold millennia. So what does men's work entail? First, this is a place for men to collaborate together. Nearly everywhere else in our society, men exist in competition with each other. As participants in men's work, we meet each other as equals. We work to support and uplift each other. We hold each other accountable, we celebrate each other, we get vulnerable with each other, and we love each other through our shit. Anthropologist Victor Turner calls this communitas. We call it brotherhood. Most men today have never experienced true brotherhood. And once we get true brotherhood, it changes every interaction we have with other men for the rest of our lives. When I meet a new man, I can tell within 30 seconds whether this man has gotten the imprint of brotherhood in his life or not. Second, as I alluded to above, true men's work provides an initiatory container for men to mature. The boy undertakes a rites of passage to become the heroic ego. The hero undergoes initiation to become a man. Initiation is a process found across all cultures throughout human history. It is a universal process of transformation. We literally have it baked into our DNA. Through the modernization of our culture, we have lost our initiatory practices. And most of the rites of passage that do exist lack the transformational core that is needed. Without initiation, we have adult males walking around as children and heroes on the inside, not as true men. The process of initiation is no joke. It involves entering a sacred container and the successive stripping away of all forms of status, social role, and identity. It's a process of psychological and spiritual breaking down into the most naked, raw, and humble elements of humanity. It is a process of submission. At the center of initiation is the death of the old role and the old identity. Here, the sacred wisdom of life is accessed. We touch the center. And in doing that, life is renewed. A new identity is bestowed upon us with both greater power and greater responsibility. In its fullness, men's work includes men acting in the role of ritual elders to steward this transformation for men who are undertaking initiation. Men's work also provides the safe and strong container for this incredibly volatile and potent process of dissolution and psychological reassembling. So initiation remembers us back into life. It reconnects us. It opens us to the wonder and the mystery and the sacredness of all life. It shows us our role in stewarding our lives, our families, our communities, and our planet. So brotherhood and initiation, for me, are the two big reasons for men's work. Beyond these, I can point to innumerable other aspects of being a man that gets supported through men's work. And I just want to briefly mention a few here. I'd like to go through each of the 4 archetypal parts of the psyche. So the warrior, the lover, the magician, and the king, and just touch on the way that men's work offers something special here. Starting with the warrior. We, as men, need to come to terms with masculine aggression. It is definitely true that all people have the capacity for violence. But it is also true that the vast majority of physical violence, rape, and abuse is perpetrated by men. The answer to masculine aggression is not to shut it down and lock it away. The answer is to have a safe space to fully embrace that aggression, to meet it head on, and to come into ownership of it. So for me, before I started men's work, I was terrified of masculine aggression, both in me and in other men. In the container of a men's retreat, when I saw other men expressing their violence, and I saw the impotence and the futility of it, and the pain and fear that lies beneath it, I stepped beyond my fear. And I got safe enough in myself to reach inside and embrace that violence that lives inside of me. Until a man has met himself there, he will never fully integrate the warrior archetype. Now, the killer, which is one expression of this, is an internal part of the psyche that holds an incredible amount of power. And when we're able to integrate the killer, he brings a magnificent blessing into our lives. Men's work is one place that we can find a safe container to go through this integration work. Moving on to the lover. It is my opinion that men need to talk to each other about sex. In addition, we need spaces in our society, all of us, to feel and release sexual shame. The biggest wound about sex is that we keep it private, and we can't heal that which stays hidden in the shadow. So men's work can and should be a forum for men to openly share both the challenges and joys of their sex lives, to be a place where we can discuss this, learn from each other, support each other, and be held accountable by each other. In addition, men's work, the container of men's work, can be one place among many where we release the disempowering grip of shame from our lives. Shame is the way that I keep myself small, make myself wrong, and really down at the core of it, tell myself I'm not okay to exist in the world. Releasing shame, which is part of the lover's job, is an incredibly liberating and empowering work. And the more that we're able to step into that, the more whole and healed we can be for all other humans that we engage with. Next is the magician. So the magician archetype teaches us how to channel power in creative and generative ways. We tap in, we open the channel, we become the hollow reed for the powers of the cosmos to move through us, and we become the conductor to create magic. As we undergo initiation, we begin to step into more and more of our power. This is not a simple process. Our power can very easily go to our heads or consume us if we do not have the grounding and the humility to wield it well. The more I empower myself, the more power also becomes available to the shadow aspects, the denied or wounded aspects of my psyche that are very hard for me to see. So men's groups function as a communal regulator of this power. We as individuals going through initiatory process step into more and more of our agency and our power, And as we access more and more of it, when we are in community, we get those reflections of here's where you're overstepping, here's where you're out of balance, here's where you need to come back. It helps keep us grounded and humble as we expand into more of our power. In this sense, men's work is invaluable. And when we look at the abuses of power by men, they largely happen by men who are at the top of an organization without any checks and balances and without accountability. Men's work builds in that accountability as we empower ourselves. So the process here is not to deny masculine power. It's actually to embrace masculine power, but to do so in a way that is life-affirming, generative, and integrated as our human psyche is able to hold it. Fourth archetype is the king. And on this one, I want to highlight integrity. Integrity for me means I am doing what I say I will do. And this is an incredibly simple concept, but it's not a given by any means growing up in our culture today. It's not something that we naturally have, expect of others, or develop. Being impeccable with my word is something that I have to grow into and learn how to accomplish. Doing this in a men's group, working on integrity and accountability, first off, I get to see other men who have got it, who are going through the process and who are struggling with the process, and that helps me in my own process of learning integrity within myself. It's also a place where I get held accountable in a loving way by my brothers. So I don't have to just hold my integrity by myself. I show up, however often an ongoing men's group meets, I show up once a month or once a week or whatever, and I get vulnerable and I share. Here's where I dropped the ball. Here's where I fell out of integrity. And then I get loving support to come back into integrity. We don't have to do this alone. Once integrity comes online, every aspect of a man's life changes. I'll broaden that and say every aspect of any human's life changes once they get integrity. From our work to our personal spiritual practices to all of our relationships, everything changes once we get integrity. So the final point that I want to make in this talk is that men's work is not simply a weekend trip. It needs to be woven into the fabric of our lives. If we use men's work as a healing fad, it will remain exactly that. What we see in other cultures is that the gathering of men happens at adolescence and continues all the way to the grave. It's my belief that by weaving men's retreats and regular men's groups into our lives, we will individually grow into more regenerative, life-affirming, mature, healthy versions of masculinity. And as we grow individually, we also shift the collective, and that collectively we will begin to enact this change that we so desperately need in the world today. In fact, what I would say is that if our civilization is going to survive through the next couple of generations, this piece, healthy, life-affirming masculinity, is essential. Without it, our civilization will die. Humans may continue on, but this collective is not going to last. So what we need is an embrace of masculinity. And those of us who have been born in male bodies, those of us who identify as men, we have the opportunity to be the internal psychic owners of that change. And then that change gets held intersubjectively together through all of our relationships with all of the other humans that we engage with. Now, women have men's work to do, just like men have women's work or feminist work to do. But theirs looks different because they are not men. So we are all doing this together. And I will say that men's work forms an essential piece of the greater picture of gender healing and beyond healing, gender evolution, stepping into what's possible at this very special time in our culture today. So that is the call to action and the impetus for men's work. And for me, why we care, why I should be spending my time and energy investing in this with all of the other options of healing modalities, awakening practices that I could be choosing to do. Men's work for me, over the last decade that I have been engaging with it, has continued to challenge me, continue to help me grow, be a place where I have made incredibly deep connections with humans who I will love for the rest of my life. It has held me through my crises. It has opened me to deeper layers of healing. All of this is to say that, like, on my path, as I've invested in men's work, it has only gotten deeper. It has only opened broader vistas and more opportunities for me. So I see this not as like a thing to check the box of, but a mystery of spirit that I can deepen and spiral and spiral and spiral deeper and deeper into. And for that, it's not just about saving the planet or saving our culture. It's also fun and enlivening. I get to step into more of me, more of who I authentically am through the container of men's work. So that is the vision that I have here to share here today. I will open it up if there are any comments or questions.
Well, Matt, if I may, let me just say that that was a wonderful way to tie that together. I have sensed many of those pieces in my year or so of being in men's work. And to have it laid out that way as, well, for one thing, as the work of a lifetime, and something that you evolve with, and that the group evolves as each individual evolves. That's just a pretty wonderful vision. And I hadn't seen it that way before. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for joining. Thanks for participating in men's work with me. It's awesome.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the delight.
Yeah.
I guess I have a question on that subject of evolution, of how you see it. You know, how, in the time you've been doing men's work, how you've, if you could talk about how you have seen, you know, an individual making progress and then that affects the group, or a group collectively learns something and just, and then that the whole way the group works sort of deepens. If you could just paint a little more detail onto some of those shifts.
Absolutely. So for me, I started doing men's work. I started going to a men's group because my girlfriend was like, you need this. And I didn't really understand what it was about, or I didn't really get it. I just kind of was like, okay. And sometimes I see that men have this yearning that they can't quite place for something. There's something more about masculinity or men that they like don't quite know what it is.
Yeah.
Other times men come in crisis. Their partners or people in their life are saying, look, you need something, go work it out with other men.
Yeah.
So we kind of show up not really knowing. And we may not be, I wasn't fully trusting of what the container was about or how this thing works, or I didn't know what brotherhood was. And so at the beginning, it's really this practice of trusting and discovery. And then we start to see other men in their power, in their light. And Robert Moore calls this arcing. We see a man in his light who's got his power lit up, and then we start to connect to that power. We feel, oh, the potency of that. We start to feel like, oh, I want some of that. I could see myself moving in that direction. So arcing is you get the transmission a little bit. And then the initiatory processes happen. And the initiation is a big deal, as you know. You have to really go into it. You have to put all of yourself into it. So there's even more trust to go through that. Initiation after initiation after initiation. It's not a one-time thing. We talk about the spiral path of initiation. It just keeps happening. So as I'm walking that initiation, the next piece is learning how to embody and integrate my power in a good way. And I touched on this a little bit. So that's where having elders, having men who have walked the path, who can see that me as this young startup kid who's like in my power and super excited to change the world, they can help guide me and give me some direction there. So that's like another phase of it. And then as we continue to walk the path, then leadership starts to open up and we start to share our voice and our gifts, like what I'm doing here in this series. Gotten to the point where it's internalized enough that I feel confident that I have something to share back. And eventually we get into the place of wanting to be leaders or mentors to help other men on their path.
Well, I have another one.
Yeah, bring it on.
Okay. Have you seen groups change? So the capacity of the group changes. I mean, you kind of hinted at it, but I don't know. I'm just curious about what kinds of qualitative shifts have you seen in groups over time?
Good question. So as individuals walk their path, you go, you do a training, whatever that training is, you come back, you're like, hey guys, I'm excited. I want to share this piece. So there's a theory of how groups evolve and grow, and there needs to be enough space for innovation to happen. And then enough dialogue for the collective to talk about what works and what doesn't. So if a group gets stuck in a given structure, or there's not space to talk or innovate, then the group just kind of carries on. And there are definitely groups that get stuck in that rut. But for groups that are able to try new things and be willing to fail and be willing to learn, like, the idea of a learning organization applies here, then the evolution is always towards what is the growth edge of the members of the group. So wherever my growth edge goes, if I have space to bring that in, that gets shared with the group. And then we're each doing that. And then the group goes its own direction. And it's like a continual unfolding process. The other thing that I'll mention here is that in my experience, it's not enough for a group just to meet regularly, once a week, every other week, once a month, whatever the cadence is, that there also needs to be deep time where we enter the sacred container. There needs to be some kind of a retreat that happens, whether it's once a year or every other year or quarterly, like whatever. If a group just meets regularly, that the depth starts to dissipate. And so it's through having these regular initiatory frameworks or retreat gatherings where the depth and the aliveness of the group gets renewed. I'm going to take another question. Where do you see women fitting into the process of men's work? Is there a constructive way for women to participate? Beautiful question. Thank you. Yeah, this particular talk was very much pointed towards men, but there is absolutely a role. So first and foremost, we all lift each other up and we create virtuous cycles between the masculine and the feminine. So me doing my work enables me to lift up women. Women doing their work enables them to lift up men. So we each need to go do our own work, women in women's group and men's in men's groups. And in addition to that, we need to come together. It's not enough for men just to do men's work. Men have to do men's work, some of that interrelationally with women. Similarly, women need to do that, the healing and the interrelational work together with men. Because the cycle can either be vicious, it can spin down in a wounded cycle, or it can spin up. So without being in the cycle, we can't shift the cycle. So women's work, celebrate other men who are doing their work. Do your own work to show up cleanly, fully empowered in your connections with men. And as you step more into that, just like as I step more into my empowered, healthy version of masculinity, that's going to be a natural invitation for the other, in your case, for men, to meet you there. And you will create the space for the healing, for the growth to happen. Great question. Mm-hmm. Yes, Conrad.
Follow on to that one is, have you seen that in action or heard about it? I'm curious what kinds of containers or structures that that work happens
Between men and women?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of this gets worked out by couples in partnership.
Mm.
But beyond that, like at the collective level, in my experience, I've done a lot of training and then participation and then teaching around sacred sexuality. So those are spaces where we are engaging between the masculine and the feminine in a really direct way. And the sexuality is a very, like, it cuts straight to the core of the dynamic. So if we go into a group space and it's like an authentic relating process space, there will be pieces that bubble up around the dynamic between the masculine and the feminine that can be worked out, particularly with, if that's one of the intentions. But in a space where we're learning somatic skills around intimacy, sensuality, sexuality, that's the focus. We are like touching how the masculine and the feminine relate, connect, share desire, share intimacy, like directly. So for me, sexuality is the primary way to connect to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
One more.
Mm-hmm.
You were saying that throughout human history, men have gotten together to initiate each other, and then after initiation to stay connected doing men's work in some form across cultures.
Yes.
And that sounds like something that, I think, oh yeah, well, that sounds true. That I can believe that. And it seems like with women, it may be different. That it's, I don't know, less structured, or it's more just happens or something. But I'm curious about the corresponding
Mhm.
needs that women have and how those get met and have gotten met.
Right. So from an anthropological perspective, when we're looking at tribal cultures, oftentimes there's a division of labor between men and women. Men go out and hunt, women tend to the children, and they do like housework, for lack of a better word. And that division of labor provides a natural structure for men gather here and women gather here. But more importantly, in those cultures that have like a living spiritual tradition with them, there are also regular festivals, holidays, ceremonies, rituals spread out over the course of the year. And sometimes those are intermingled, but oftentimes those are also separated by gender. And so the men enter sacred space together, the women enter sacred space together. Sometimes it's all, but they each have their own spaces to do this process. So your question about women, one of the biggest differences is that, again, I'm not an expert on this, but from my inexpert opinion, men take the adolescent boys, women include children. And so that's another difference, is that the group of women also includes small children running around and how they raise and tend to those children. That doesn't necessarily need to be what we do today. That's just how humans did it for most of our history. Cool. Wonderful. Well, I want to say thank you, all of you, for joining and listening and participating. This is the first time, well, the first time I've given a speech like this, and the first time I've done a series of talks like this. How does group work really look like, and how would you find a group? Great. So, Thomas, there are a few really large organizations out in the world. Mankind Project and Sacred Sons are the two that come to mind. You can do some Googling, and those will provide like a weekend initiation. And that's a good place to start to find men who are also interested in this. In general, asking around, word of mouth, to see where else in your social circle men might be gathering is kind of how I did it. And I think how a lot of men do it. What does it really look like? Well, there's no one prescribed answer. It doesn't have to look any particular way. And there's actually like a really large range of what constitutes men's work. I'm giving my vision here of like what good or powerful or meaningful men's work is. It's not guys who get together and drink a beer and watch sports once a week. For me, though that may be men gathering, that's not men's work in this sense. But the full spectrum is available. So there's no singular right answer to that. If you want more resources on finding a men's group, feel free to reach out to me after this. You have, so I'm gonna type that in. Beautiful. Okay. So with that, I want to say thank you again. It's an honor and a pleasure to get to show up here and be doing this and talking about this. Appreciate each of you for taking your time to come and engage. And I hope that you will stay in touch. That blessings on your day.